Okay, Michael, thank you, and nice to see so many of you here. Yeah, you're right. Property Week has pushed well into the world of housing. We consider it equal now to retail, office and industrial, and that's really just following what our audience is doing. The whole property market seems to have these four focuses now, the four sectors, which makes it all the richer and more interesting. So first of all, thank you to Hogan Lovells for having us. And also Welbeck Land for organising the whole event. I'm also here in my capacity as president of the grandly titled president of something called the International Building Press. It's something we're really proud of, the PR people and journalists within our world. It's been going about 40 years. It's not actually very international, it's UK based, but we love it all the same. And we're going to be covering this event in Property Week, but also there's one or two journalists and IBP members from other titles who are here to cover it in their brands. Now, the reason lots of people are here from the press is this is a great debate. We're starting with the premise or asking the question, will future generations live in the countryside or in cities? Where will they live? Where will they work? And to make it really fun, we're actually going to turn that thought into an actual debate with a motion. So, speaking for the motion, we believe that the government should be encouraging development both on green fields and in cities. We're going to hear first from Chris Tinker, who's a board director and expert on regeneration at Crest Nicholson. And then the third speaker is going to be someone else who doesn't need any introduction, Liz Peace, the head of the BPF. They're going to be speaking for the motion that the government should be encouraging development both on green fields and in cities. Speaking against that motion is going to be Richard Blakeway, who's now Deputy Mayor, Housing, Land and Property, recently promoted by Boris after his re-election. Richard Blakeway in the GLA. And not surprisingly, also against the motion, we believe that the government should be encouraging development both on green fields and in cities. One of the preeminent thinkers on sustainability and around the built environment, of course, Jonathan Porritt, founder director of Forum for the Future. Now, you might also wonder who my colleague on the far left is. Keeping order tonight is going to be Simon Block, who's from the Commonwealth Boxing Council. Simon is going to be the ref. We've asked him to come in with a warning and a bell at agreed times, just to ensure no one gets out of line. There's going to be plenty of time for me, but more importantly for you, to ask questions of the four panellists before we move to a conclusion. We're going to give them a minute each at the very end, and that'll be very closely watched by Simon to sum up. Then we'll move to a vote. So I think it's pretty balanced. There's arguments for and against encouraging development both on green fields and in cities. To kick off, it's over to Chris Tinker.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. My name's Chris Tinker. I'm an Executive Board Director with Crest Nicholson. For those who don't know, Crest develops approximately 2,000 homes per year and undertakes £30 million worth of mixed commercial as part of those schemes. 70% of what we do is on brownfield land, but 50% is housing and 50% are apartments. We have a significant strategic land portfolio on both greenfield sites and, dare I say, greenbelt sites, both of a brown and a green nature. And about 25% of our housing are on those strategic sites, which feed through to our business. The context for this debate is clearly that as an industry we're delivering between 100 and 110,000 homes a year, of which at the moment about 15% on average is affordable. The government's ONS statistics show that 230,000 homes per annum are required. Occupation levels are stable and have been for about 5 years at 2.4 dwellings per occupant. But there's a strong regional variance in where the demand lies, and for those of us in the industry, most of us know that it's the southern half of England where there's the most economic activity, where the jobs and the transport links are strongest. The government recognises economic need for house building and construction. House building in particular stimulates DIY landscaping, kitchens, carpets, and dare I even say it, lawyers and agents. The scale of challenge, though, is significant, because if we were to deliver 230,000 dwellings per annum, and if you said 20% was affordable on average, then we would need 185,000 open market homes to be sold per year. Now, for those who don't know, the industry sells approximately 25 to 30 homes per year per outlet. That means that to do 185,000 homes a year, we need 6,000 outlets. The industry currently has way under 3,000 outlets, of which the majors, the top sort of 15 house builders, have 1,800, about 60% of the supply. It used to be 40%, but the credit crunch has impacted upon small and medium-sized house builders disproportionately. Therefore, irrespective of where the land is developed, city or suburbia, we need 2.5 times the number of planning permissions per annum for every year over the next 10 years if we're to have a hope of delivering and meeting housing need. Now at Crest, just to get in, we've employed Forum for the Future to work with us to have a look at what the business trends are and how we can set a sustainable business for 2022, 10 years hence. And we've looked at the factors that will affect our industry between now and then. And part of that, obviously, is to do with demographics, the access to capital of people of different ages, and the product expectations that these people have. And broadly, it wouldn't surprise you to know that we focused on those coming through higher education, who post-2012 will have average debts of £35,000 to £50,000 as they leave university. They expect to have 10 jobs during their lifetime. They need to be mobile, they have good access, they need a good access to transport, they're highly IT and social media literate. They enjoy the urban lifestyle, and they will have to, however, live longer with their parents or cohabit before they're in a position to buy a home. At the opposite end, we have the baby boomers, the equity rich, of which there'll be 40% more of 60 and over between 2000 and 2025. These are people who don't aspire yet to move into a McCarthy and Stone retirement home. They don't generally want to move into cities. They don't generally like identikit housing sites. But they remain aspirational, and for those of us in housing, they have something that's valuable, which is called discretionary income that they can apply to something that they like and they aspire to. There's also, I'm sure we're aware, an increasing polarisation between those who have not in property and those who have, which is causing quite, I would think, a social upheaval of the future. So these factors in my mind alone point for the need for urban and suburban development. Urban brownfield development in London, major cities where you have good universities, strong business base, and in areas of office or business where they have become obsolete. In addition to the super rich who move into London, this will be a home for 20 to 40-year-old, cash rich, equity poor, young people coming out of university who need to be mobile and who need to be able to access jobs. There's likely to be a significant affordable component within our cities as well, simply because people need to be able to access jobs and the support services. Suburban development, largely on greenfield sites, is also required. On sustainable parts of the greenbelt or on greenfields, which in my experience, even though I'm the urban developer within Crest, are usually far more diverse ecologically than the greenfields we build on. They should include space, they should have great landscaping, they should have good quality parking. They should be distinctive in their architectural appeal so that they appeal to all ages and all affordability brackets. They should be properly funded by way of their infrastructure, both community and physical, and they should have community management arrangements so that they remain affordable and the quality and the legacy go hand in glove. They were once called garden cities, or some of the better examples of the strategic land that we've all delivered over the years. They actually, above all, were characterised as places that people wanted to invest in and live in. These are often developments of scale which can support economic activity, transport and retail, where significant infrastructure needs to be established up front and several developers can deliver it at scale in parallel, which are generally welcomed by existing communities if they are well planned and seen to be distinctive, and which, if housing need is to be met, should be embraced by politicians and telegraph readers alike. The challenges are that a lot of that land came forward through public procurement. It involved the expenditure of large sums of money on infrastructure up front. And that is very unlikely in the austere times in which we live, I'm sure we'll all agree. The other thing that the government never recognises when it has, and it started to talk about garden cities and suburbs again in the future, is just how land hungry they are. Because well-planned development with adequate car parking of the type that our rich 60-year-olds might aspire to is probably twice as land hungry as a PPG3 housing site. By the time you put in proper landscaping and then you put some on-plot curtilage car parking, then we do have a challenge in terms of how much land it'll take. In truth, it requires local authority vision, and sometimes it needs greenbelt land if it's to be sustainable. So in conclusion, and putting my thoughts forward, the scale of the planning and delivery challenge that we all are aware of and live in on a daily basis, and the scale of housing need, is immense. As we look forward, there are strong emerging demographics and social trends which point to both the need for an active urban development and active suburban housing. Urban housing will be most suited to London and provincial cities with strong universities, a mobile population and diverse employment base. Quality, well-planned suburban housing is desperately needed, but also needs a step change in scale and quality if it has become acceptable to an increasingly sceptical electorate.
7-minute warning, Speaker.
Thank you, and political class. I therefore urge you, ladies and gentlemen, to support the motion that the government should be encouraging development on both greenfields and in cities. Thank you.
Okay, convincing stuff from
I was
Chris.
only given 7 minutes.
Over to a real city person now then, Richard Blakeway.
Giles, thanks very much. Walking down to this auditorium, I went past, I was kindly shown the view out of the windows, and it's probably the only view in London, or one of the few views in London, where St Paul's dwarfs the Shard. And it made me think, when I went to the top, I'm sure you will all do this, and many of you will have done this, when you go to the top of the Shard, and it's like being in an aeroplane, your connection with the landscape is like being in an aeroplane. There's one thing that you really notice about the city, and the thing you notice is how green it is. The parks that we have, the green spaces that we have, it makes it quite unique and quite distinct to other large cities around the world. And the critical thing, and that unique aspect, is something that we must enhance and preserve and continue to deliver. So it's not just about the homes, although clearly I would say the homes are important. It is also about delivering green space, and maintaining green space, which is critically important to our quality of life. And this is a city which so far has already lost something like the equivalent of 7 Hyde Parks in back gardens and in green space since the Second World War. And what we clearly need to do is to continue to protect and enhance it. Now, Jonathan is going to do all the hard work on this motion, and the only way that I've secured success here is by taking the voting thing myself. So we're going to keep voting for ourselves. But the only I have 2 knockout punches, or whatever analogy I hope. The first is in response to the point. Actually, I've got 3 knockout punches. There you go. The first point is in response to what Chris was saying. Look, Chris was going in a direction I was kind of broadly with. Look, the demand is in the southeast. The reality is, the demand is in cities, or rather, more precisely, I would say this, in one city. If you look at population growth over the last 10 years, London has grown at 12% faster than the rest of England. I was just described as a true city boy. Actually, I grew up in the country. I grew up in an area which is so rural. I point at aeroplanes when I went out in the back garden. The reality is that there is a gravitation, and this has been the case since enclosure. We saw it beautifully demonstrated through the opening ceremony to the Olympic Games. This is a city where people are gravitating. Our population is already higher. The census shows it's already higher than we expected. London's population is going to be at the highest point in its history within less than a decade. 1939 was the last peak. combination of evacuation, Second World War, the Abercrombie Plan. This led to dispersal. Those policies are not policies which will be applied now, and we shouldn't seek to apply them now by building homes outside the areas where the demand is. As I say, the demand is clearly within the capital. There is also an absolute imperative to build homes, because even though the population has gone up, the formation of households hasn't gone up correspondingly, which suggests that there's a real issue here about not delivering enough homes for formation of households. So my first point is the demand is in urban areas, and especially in the capital city. It is not where the green belt is. My second point would be in relation to the land that we have already, and this is a statistic that you will all know, but it's an important one, is I think the government's analysis of brownfield land, that's not the technical term, but is there's something shy of 62,000 hectares of this stuff. Now, it probably slightly overstates it, not all of it is ready to go, but about half of it is. And whilst it does require investment up front, it's right that we make those investments. So actually, there's a huge untapped potential in brownfield land. I think in London, it's something like 300,000 homes that could be delivered on brownfield land in the capital alone. Now, if that is possible in the capital alone, then surely it is important that we look at previously developed land rather than just looking at our precious and important green belt. And then my final point is about the economy, and it brings us back to the issue which I raised around population. Look, London's population is growing, but in particular, it's growing around households.
7-minute warning, Speaker.
It's growing around households who would traditionally fit into the mid-market. They've got household incomes of £50,000 to £60,000. They purchase at values of something like £400 a square foot. If you look at the jobs which will be created in London over the next decade, over half the jobs which will be created in London will be in the professional services. They are exactly those sort of people. And we need to desperately supply homes for them, because at the moment there is a strong market offer, which often you're seeing sales overseas, and there is still government subsidy for conventional affordable housing. It's the people in the middle who are being squeezed, and if we don't address that, the economic loss to the country, to London in particular, will be somewhere between 15 and 20 billion pounds. So given all our focusing on jobs and growth, it's important to build the homes to house the people who will make a vital contribution to this country's economy. London is the motor of the UK's economy, and therefore pursuing a policy of building homes where they're not needed in the Lake District or somewhere would be detrimental, not just to the countryside but also to our economy. Okay, thank you.
Okay, very good. Where did you grow up, just out of interest?
Shropshire.
Shropshire, very rural. Okay. Right, Liz, over to you for the motion.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I love listening to Richard. I almost see him as a politician, 9 minutes done without a note, full of conviction, and it's when he gets onto the squeezed middle that I always enjoy. I would also like to thank you, Richard, for doing a lot of my job for me. I think you have actually really taken away most of my first part of my speech. I'm going to do it anyway because I've run out of things to say. But this is talking about demand for homes. Now, in my humble opinion, it's the duty of a government, or government, both central and local, to meet the legitimate needs of its citizens. And housing and employment are two of those needs. And believe it or not, for both of those, we actually need buildings. It's very difficult living in a field. It's very difficult trying to do your business in the middle of the street. Just think about this for a moment statistically. There are 1.8 million families, that's 5 million people, on local authority waiting lists in England alone. Household growth, 21.7 million households in 2008, 27.5 million households in 2033. That's a growth of 27%, 232,000 per annum. 18% of females and 29% of males aged between 20 and 34 are still living with their parents. That sort of statistic usually causes my husband to have a nervous shudder. Probably be the same for a number of you. The average age of the first-time buyer is now 40. It's actually gone up from the 37 we have actually been quoting. So we need homes. And the demand isn't just in London, and it isn't just in cities. Now, of course, we should try and use previously developed land. 62,000 hectares, I think you said. Although interestingly, it'd be interesting to know how much of that is actually in green areas, in countryside. How much of it is this semi-brown land, the old airfields. I'm ex-MOD, as many of you know. I know an awful lot of old airfields up and down the country, but let's leave that for a moment. We should try and use this previously developed land wherever we can. I absolutely don't have a problem of that. We should try and build in urban areas close to transport links. But come on, let's get real. No, not actually everybody wants to be on brownfield land in the gap between Sheffield and Rotherham or somewhere like that. I am actually a Brummie and have relations up north, so, you know, we go up quite a lot. I've driven through acres of this stuff. There's an awful lot of brownfield land that people simply don't want to be on, and it is impractical to build houses on. What my friend Mr. Tinker would agree with me, the house builders are not going to build houses where they can't sell them. They have to look at where people want to go. And unless we move to a Soviet-style state, which is actually going to direct people to Rotherham... Sorry, I haven't got a real down on Rotherham, and I do apologise if there's anybody in the audience who comes from Rotherham, but yeah, I'm sort of exaggerating to make my point. There is no way we are going to be able to direct people to where all of this brownfield land is. Right, so let's talk a little bit about the Green Belt. Of course, it wasn't actually in the motion, and you know, I admire our organisers for avoiding that. It is somewhat sort of hysterical, and there is a great deal of mystification about the Green Belt. So, I do, however, feel that talk of the Green Belt and Greenland, if you'll forgive the mixed metaphor, is a red herring. 10.6% of the UK's land is actually classified as urban. That's all. 2/3 of the population actually think 25% of the UK is urban. It's not. 10.6%. If 250,000 homes were built every year for 25 years, only 1% of England's landmass would be used. How about that? That doesn't actually sound as if in meeting this housing need, we have got to do huge detriment to the countryside if we actually acknowledge that some of it can be built outside of urban centres. Of course, if we build some of that demand on brownfield land, then what goes out of the urban centres on greenfield land is even less. Development on green fields does not have to be bad. It does not have to be uncontrolled. It absolutely shouldn't be uncontrolled. This is why it's so important for local authorities to have well-made, well-designed, well-consulted plans. We've already heard from Chris about the sort of things that his company actually thinks about when it is doing development. Provided you put in good transport links, you put in good green spaces, you put in good green design, this need not be detrimental to areas of the countryside. But I'm going to leave you with one final thought, and it's quite a personal one. I actually live in a house built 30 years ago on what was greenfield land. I'm led to believe it was actually a pig farm. We won't go there. It's on the edge of an extremely nice market town in Hampshire. What moral right have I, enjoying the benefits of that location, to pull up the drawbridge behind me and deny a similar pleasure to those families who also choose not to live in urban centres? I urge you, ladies and gentlemen, please support this motion. Thank you.
Okay, so our final speaker and opposing the motion is Jonathan Porritt, Founder Director, Forum for the Future.
Right, well, thank you very much indeed. Two things to say just by way of introduction. First, I am a sustainable development activist rather than an environmentalist. And that matters because it means I care as much about the economy, society and social justice as I do about the environment. And secondly, I am a non-executive director of a company called Wilmot Dixon. And if I didn't have some interest in building things, that would be a very odd way of spending my time. We're quite interested in building things, a lot of things. And as Liz knows, over the years, I have been an ardent advocate of the need for more development of the right kind in the right place, including the need for more homes in this country. I believe it is an appalling problem that we have this housing deficit, and I've said so time after time after time. So too, by the way, does every one of those organisations that you might normally characterise as being classic environmental NIMBYs. They all believe we have a major problem here. Whether we have a problem to the tune of 230,000 homes a year or a little bit less than that is not something for us to worry about tonight. So here we are with this motion encouraging development both on green fields and in cities. Now, it is always, of course, very bad form to blame what one is about to say on the sloppy use of the English language by those who have organised the debate. But we have been encouraged to do so. Whilst this may not accord entirely with your own personal views, we hope that you will be happy with this structure, and should you feel free to propose or oppose with suitable caveats and qualifications, then please go ahead. So I am having real difficulty with this motion because actually, secretly, deep down, I kind of agree with it. For two reasons. One, obviously we have to build in cities. From a sustainability point of view, the world of the future is going to be an urban world. 80% of people will live in cities by 2060. So our reality, if it is to be a sustainable reality, is an urban reality. There are huge benefits from that, from a sustainability point of view, in terms of energy management, optimised use of transport infrastructures, improved use of waste management facilities, access to services, opportunities for people in terms of leisure, recreation, all of these things. So let's celebrate the fact that our future is going to be an urban one, because there's nothing bad about it from a sustainability point of view. In fact, there are many, many opportunities. Equally, as you heard from Richard, we've got opportunities to make better use of existing housing in urban areas. We haven't touched yet this evening on the empty homes issue, but it is a critical issue. Calculations of anywhere between 350,000 and 400,000 empty homes at any one time. And personally, I am not deeply impressed by Eric Pickles' latest contribution to that debate, a notional sum of 300 million to deal with something like 5,000 homes. If we wanted to get serious about the empty homes issue, we could. And we could do it in a way that is completely compatible with the notionally localist agenda of this government. We could enable local authorities to use their general power of well-being in their own area and decide to charge council tax at differential rates on homes that are occupied and homes that aren't. It's perfectly possible. If you put a multiplier of 2, 3, 4, 5 on the council tax for an empty home, guess what? It probably doesn't stay empty that long. We also know that we have a very large number of extant planning permissions for new houses, which are not being taken up at the moment. And again, I would like to see the government do something about that. But I want to come back to what Richard said. We have a lot of brownfield land still, enough for 300,000 homes in London. We're just not talking about London only tonight. Obviously, we've now had a quick mention of Rotherham, though I noticed that Liz's view of the north is Birmingham, which is always a bit troublesome. And I can assure you, as we work a lot with local authorities and big cities in the north, there are plenty of opportunities for new building on brownfield land, particularly in cities like Manchester and Leeds. And they want to be able to bring forward new developments on those brownfield lands in ways that at the moment they found very difficult. So my basic belief is that we've probably got nearly sufficient land to do most of the new build that we need from our existing brownfield land, but not all. Not all. And here, unfortunately, I'm going to have to agree technically with the motion, even as I urge you to vote against it. How could anybody be against doing house building in the right way on a greenfield site if it can be developed properly? It's impossible to say no single new house will ever be built on a green field. It's impossible. If you say that, you really have no locus in this debate whatsoever. But it all comes down to what I think we've all said here this evening, which is what's going to make it so problematic for you, is it has to be done in the right way. And if it's done in the right way and meets the increasingly rigorous sustainability criteria that we now have for new build in this country. I have no problem to that. I never have had a problem with it. I've been deeply critical of organisations like the CPRE on the difficulty they've had on the conversion of farm buildings, for instance. I've been a strong advocate of new eco-towns. And they seemed to me in the old government to be really a good idea once they'd sorted out all the rubbish from the good stuff. Unfortunately, they now seem to have gone. But what this motion missed out on by deliberately talking about green field, not about green belt, is the controversy around green belt. And that's really what we're talking about here. I think we all know that. So I'm going to urge you to vote against this motion on the assumption that the organisers of tonight's debate probably meant green belt. They just didn't dare say it. And when we get to green belt, I want to tell Liz that is not a red herring. And it's not a red herring because it is a politically charged, crucially important issue that needs to be addressed in the right way. And for this government, as part and parcel of its demonisation of everything to do with planning, and individually to do with planners, as part of that witch hunt, to say that planners are single-handedly blocking the return to economic growth in this country is insane. Absolutely insane. We do need to do something about the green belt.
7-minute warning, Speaker.
We really do need to do something about the green belt. Again, as Liz knows, I've argued this for a long time. But we're not going to do the right thing about green belt as part of a knee-jerk, instantaneously ill-thought-out decision sorted out by George Osborne and Eric Pickles over a glass of whatever beer it is they drink together, with a completely crazy notion about green belt offsets or green belt substitute areas, which I have yet to meet anybody in the housing or planning world thinks will work. We need to do it properly. We need a proper debate about the green belt, not this hurried, rushed and utterly incompetent new idea brought forward by this government. So that's, I'm sorry to say, why you're going to have to vote against the motion, even as you probably think it's more or less right.
Okay. Let's think about the motion as Jonathan has set it out there. I mean, I think that does put some sort of clear blue water between the two. I'm going to ask a couple of questions, then it's over to you. I mean, Chris, one thing I can't understand is there is all this constant moaning about planning from the house building world, but surely it's far, far, far more to do with the lack of mortgage availability. That's why the housing market isn't functioning very well, isn't it?
I think probably at the moment, mortgage availability and access to capital is the biggest drag on immediate output. But if you rectify that overnight, which in many ways, it could
press it. Yeah, carry on.
In many ways, we could find ourselves in a situation where credit eased in a couple of years' time. Everyone talks about the 400,000 extant permissions that we developers are sat on. Well, within Crest, we have a consented land bank of over 16,000 plots, which is nearly 8 years' supply. But as I point out to people, Debbie and her team started building on Bath West and Riverside last year. They've delivered 150 homes so far, but that means there's still 2,050 that are consented that we can't get at yet. And you can only develop, and there's a gas works on half of it. And for me, when I look at this industry, there's a significant proportion of urban land that is consented that is simply not implementable. And now a lot of that sits within the 400,000 dwellings that you quote. So actually, I think, clearly we do have a financing issue. Clearly, the access to mortgage for first-time buyers in particular is the challenge that both the government and house builders face at the moment. But let's be very mindful of just the step change in planning that will have to occur if we are to anywhere near meet housing needs. Okay.
Richard, I've got one for you. I mean, there's a motion at the Lib Dem conference this week saying that there should be a tax or restrictions on second homes being bought by overseas people in London. I mean, isn't part of the problem in London that loads and loads of homes are bought by people who don't live in them?
Well, it's always been a feature of London's market. It's not a new thing that. Is this working?
That's it. Have it.
It's always been a feature of London's market, the overseas.
But what about when you drive past the 800 homes from Battersea about to be built, all sold abroad, direct to Malaysia? What's the point of that?
Well, can we return to the motion? Look, two points. Firstly, we've got to think about what product we can bring forward, what product is viable in this market, and that's why to reference what I said, there's a huge untapped mid-market that we need to focus on. The second is, look, overseas buyers create demand in the market where we're clearly struggling with our banks and so forth to replicate that demand here. I think the real issue is how do you harness that investment to be able to deliver more homes priced in a way that will help, which could be purchased by people who are Londoners or UK nationals.
Okay. Liz, I mean, Chris made an interesting point. Sustainable parts of the greenbelt, better product can be guaranteed. This will be the answer. Everything that's built is going to be great. How can the house building and property worlds guarantee that? The house builders in particular have flung up a load of rubbish over the years, haven't they?
I think a lot of developers have flung up a load of rubbish. None of my members, of course. Thank you. Quality is always an issue. I mean, that's why we have a planning system. And I would just like to sort of establish for the record that the property industry does not want to do away with the planning system. The property industry actually likes a planning system and wants an efficient, functioning planning system that will stop just about anything being built anywhere. So actually, good developers care about what they build. They care about the environment they're building in. They self-interest. They get more money if they can do something good. How do you sort of hold their feet to the fire if they're not going to? Well, that is actually the job of what one hopes would be efficient planning authorities, efficient community consultation. And if both sides, enter into this debate with an end point of view of actually getting something of quality done, then you might actually get there. The worry is when developers come along, they put in a planning application, and it is the local authority's view that that should be stopped at all costs, and there is no room for discussion, no room for compromise. You then get into confrontation, you get into appeal, and I would contend that actually the outcome of that sort of situation is far worse than if you can have a sensible debate between two sets of consenting adults about what is actually possible.
I thought it was really interesting reading about Newbury Racecourse, which has been renamed the Racecourse Newbury. I saw it over the weekend. One of the silliest rebrandings I've ever seen. But I think it's David Wilson Homes, have taken 2 years to get a consent there, and I don't think it's a very big scheme, but 2 years in planning.
A lot more than that.
And I mean, I don't think you could actually say that. I mean, it's not even controversial.
How long has that one been going for?
Well, there's a gentleman in my company who was promoting that site at least 5 years before he joined us. So I would
think it's
say
2 years
it's
since the
probably
application went in.
Yeah, but it's probably taken 7 years in the assembly and the planning process.
Yeah.
And that's not about building on green belt or environmentally sensitive land. Newbury Racecourse is not particularly, I would contend, not a hugely sensitive green site. But it does have to be done properly. The infrastructure has to be put in. You want it properly landscaped. You've got to achieve acceptable density. And as I say, this has got to be a sensible negotiation between both parties. You need strength and indeed compromise and pragmatism on both sides. I'm sure that's what you provide.
Okay, and my last question, Jonathan. I thought the Telegraph one day last year, when they were campaigning against the NPPF, really, shamelessly nailed their colours to the mast when they said, shock headline on the front page, NPPF will cause house prices to fall. So it's pure self-interest that I think, or you might say a lot of people in the sustainability lobby have in mind. What's also wrong with building on Greenbelt when it may be scrubland on the edge of Heathrow or this or that? So self-interest and what's wrong with Greenbelt building on it?
I may have misinterpreted you. So what What's self-interest?
Well, aren't people who are looking to protect the green belt just looking to protect the value of their own homes, to have a not in my backyard type?
Well, there's plenty of NIMBY stuff going on all around the country. I mean, that's not news to anybody, certainly not for readers of the Telegraph. But it's true to say that a lot of those people aren't conventional environmentalists. They're people who have an interest in protecting the value of their own home or their community or whatever it might be. The issue about the Greenbelt is different from that. Many of the people who oppose building on the Greenbelt are not the people who live locally there. They're people who believe that the Greenbelt is, historically speaking, something that has been, on the whole, valuable to the way in which development control has been exercised in this country over the last 60 years, and should not just be thrown to the developers, to the wolves, I was about to say, but I meant to the developers, without so much as a really seriously engaged process as to how you would do what I think everybody would like to do, which is to look at the bits of the Greenbelt that are actually really awful. They don't bring any local amenity to people. There's no conservation or biodiversity benefit. There's nothing there. You don't even get dog walkers because it's such sort of scruffy land or whatever it might be. There's no discernible benefit at all, other than saying this is a barrier between something over here and something here. And in those cases, that's the national debate I've always wanted to have, which is you begin to talk about how can you lift the value of that land for people and nature at the same time, and in the process create new net economic value.
Okay, right. Asked each of the panelists a question myself. Now that's over to you before we move to the summing up. Who wants to set the ball rolling out there? Okay, start with Colin here. Do you want to shout out who you are, Colin?
My name is Colin Peacock and I'm chairman of Ida Homes Limited. During the discussion I heard you make reference to homes and houses. When you spoke about the urban environment, typically spoke about homes. When you spoke about greenfields, typically spoke about houses. My question therefore is this: of the 300,000 homes that could be built in London, how many houses are therefore appropriate to families with young children?
Okay, Richard, over to you.
Well, at the moment, about 80% of London's new build is flatted development. However, it's 2 points really. Firstly, is it's you can deliver product, and it's interesting to see, particularly since we introduced the Mayor of London's design guide, how this is having an impact on typologies and on design. It is possible to deliver family-friendly living space in a flatted development. Masonettes and larger balconies and so forth. But secondly, there's also some major developments which are coming forward, where it's predominantly housing, and we're trying to recreate the kind of Georgian sense of squares and streets. And a good example of that, for example, would be the developments which are coming forward on the Olympic Park. We've got some stuff going on down in Cane Hill in Croydon, which is which harks back to that kind of sense of house and streets that is clearly enormously popular, not just amongst families but amongst people generally.
Chris, what do you think? Houses or homes? What's doable in London?
Well, it's a sober thought that as a board director of a housing company, I can't afford to buy most of the houses that are actually built in London. And I think I'm an urban developer really through and through, and do believe in good quality, sustainable urban development, and most of that would be flattered. And I don't have a problem with that if the flats are big enough, well enough designed, and set in good spaces. But if you come into London, the prices are not there for real people to buy homes. I'm trying, we as a business are trying to chase, some large sites of the future, if you like, and we don't need any more today. And you're thinking we ought to be in the £300 to £400 a square foot bracket for real people to be able to access homes around the periphery of London. Central London now is £1,000 a square foot minimum, and then you're going up. What person in this room, if they were really, I know there's probably some extremely well-off people in this room, but what person in this room's children, people, young professionals working in the city can even begin to hope to buy that. And Richard, I mean, we debate these things, you know, as we talk about, you know, these things outside of groups like this. I really fear for London as to how real people and people with, you know, with housing need can have a sustainable future in London. And I don't know what the answer is, because you can't stop overseas people paying silly amounts of money for apartments that who knows whether they can let for X £1,000 a week or a month or whatever it is that this week, you know, is the bidding round. So I do really fear for London. I don't know where it's got to, and I think as civic leaders, you must really fear for it as well, because it almost feels to be out of control as a world investor market, you know. And then you look at the opposite, which are the Leeds, the Manchesters, the you know, the Liverpools and the Birminghams, which really caught a terrible cold when it came to the credit crunch, and where you've got this disbalance between the amount of urban housing apartments that were delivered and what people could at that time afford. We spoke at the Liberal Party conference yesterday, and one of the questioners was, why should we allow houses in Ipswich to be built when there's all those empty ones around the docks that nobody will finish off? Well, the truth is they won't finish it off because the value of them is less than the cost to finish them off. And that's why they won't, because there's no market for them. So actually, you know, for me, real people live in houses which cost to £200 to £300 a square foot, which is still an awful lot. And you have to go, you know, probably 60 miles outside London before you arrive at a band where the values sort of fall to that sort of level. So actually, I can only see greenfield housing as being the sustainable form of economic housing for real people to buy, because it costs us more than that in the urban centres to build it now, let alone, you know, by the time you put the infrastructure and the public realm in. So, you know, to me, greenfields are an absolute imperative, because unless you're in the richer areas of cities, you can't even deliver the stuff for what real people can afford to pay.
Okay, good point. Next question. I think we had one down here. John.
The panel's, Christopher Paul, Stevens Straits Solicitors. The panel's concentrated on the break on the housing market being the lack of mortgages, availability of mortgages, but the growth in the market for homes to let. I wonder how much demand can be created by that, and whether tax breaks is the answer. Years ago, Gordon Brown had the idea of allowing residential development to be an authorised investment for pensions, and that creates an enormous demand.
Yeah. Well, let's ask again, Richard. What's being done about this in London?
Sorry, what's being done about the tax breaks issue is a bit...
Tax breaks, encouraging homes for let.
Clearly some of these powers rest within Treasury rather than with the Mayor of London. I think the potential for build to let is clearly there. It would appear that the yields are there in London. Interestingly, though, you know, that sort of product is probably more viable not in central London, even though the rents are incredibly high, but in outer London and you know, places like Barking, for example. So really, you know, on the edges of London because of the way in which the values work. So whether it's a substitute for the challenge that Chris is highlighting, I do wonder. And you know, I mean, you've seen increasingly the issue of rising rents now compared to, you know, historically low mortgage rates mean that the cost of renting is actually quite high. Nonetheless, the point which is made and the idea of unlocking investment, pension funds and so forth is absolutely right. Product may be private rented, it may be intermediate. I think the intention of delivering a mid-market offer is the right one. There's a series of ways in which you can do it. There are already some tax breaks around this. There's, you know, the residential REITs is a clear example of that.
What about Chris's point, though, just that it's not possible to build a house for someone of normal income to buy in London now?
Well, it is a real growing challenge, and we're going to be saying, the Mayor is going to be saying more on this over the next few weeks, so I don't want to preempt it, but I think part of it, I'm conscious that I'm repeating this point a lot, but it's an important point, is around mid-market offer. Also, part of it is looking at our infrastructure, our transport infrastructure, which is going in. I mean, you had, you know, 20 years ago, Docklands Light Railway, which unlocked parts of East London which were previously undeveloped, where you wouldn't necessarily have the demand. I think it's perfectly possible to look at transport infrastructure that's going on, and you can create demand in places which are actually incredibly close, to the places of work in London, easily commutable distance. And so I think that has to be part of the shape of London as it's coming forward.
Just come in very quickly on the buy-to-let stuff, because I think that is really important, and probably the most important bit of the most recent package of announcements that have been made. And I think that from our point of view in Wilmot Dixon, this is certainly a very interesting new set of measures the government is bringing forward, not just a sum of money to help with site acquisition, but also this much bigger sum, and billions are being talked about here, to enable providers to raise debt. And I think that is exactly the kind of approach that we need in terms of that market, and if that really takes off, then we could see some big changes there.
We had this Adrian Montague idea of making some land only available for private renting. I mean, Chris, Liz, what do you think of that?
Well, you know that we at the BPF have been promoting a sort of bigger, what we call sort of professional private rented sector, i.e., it's large providers who actually provide quality rented accommodation in bulk, not necessarily expensive, but quality. One of the problems has been getting the stock. The next one has been actually getting the right sort of return. And what Adrian Montague actually said, which we very much supported, was that you need to somehow or other try and manipulate the costs going into that. And one way of doing it is to get at the planning around the land designation, because that in turn will influence the value of the land. That way you then might be able to create a product that is actually more suitable, gets at the right sort of price, the right level of return, and indeed is affordable for the renters. But I think that the fact remains that for an awful lot of people who cannot buy until they're 40 or whenever, renting is the only option. And I think as a nation, we ought to get used to this and be a bit more relaxed about renting. Lots of continental countries, indeed America, they see renting as much more a normal sort of part of growing up, part of, even sort of start your family in a decent quality rented home, and not get this sort of obsession with having to buy at all costs as soon as you possibly can.
Chris?
Yeah, I mean, if I speak for Chris Nicholson, I explained earlier we have a sizable land bank, and probably 25 of those sites could easily take private rent. And we've explored with a number of parties, both institutions and specialists over the years, as to whether we could do an element of private rent, because when you've got a limit on how much you can sell, which we all do at the moment, the only way to increase your output is to build to rent. It's quite straightforward. We've bought a lot of that land, we've serviced a lot of that land, so you'd think it would be good business to build it and rent it, or build it and sell it into a vehicle and rent it. The truth is, though, that the values out of build to rent without any assistance or subsidy are probably 70 to 80%, let's say, of the open market value. I.e., they're not far off the higher tenure level income that you get for affordable housing, which is why Montague has pointed toward the need to substitute, affordable housing for private rent. Well, there's a political hot potato for a start, which most projects would struggle to sort out in a couple of years. There's a real challenge in the industry, which is the capacity of the delivery side of the industry. I mean, we do knock the planners sometimes, but I think we have to say that because planning has been so difficult over the years, the house building industry is consolidated down into, let's say, 15 very significant players. They've all taken a hell of a beating through the credit crunch, and they've realised that actually the growth agenda they were going for before was just silly, and that you can't say that there isn't another credit crunch coming around the corner, and therefore all have stabilised. We've stabilised. We're probably all going to grow 10 to 15% a year in our open market dwellings, but no more. And because it would be foolish to start to grow more in the climes that we take. So private rent is absolute. If this government wants another 75,000 units before it leaves office, which I personally feel is impossible, but if it wants it, and that's certainly what it's thrashing around to try and get hold of, private rent is the only way to do it.
Okay, another question over here.
Thank you. Nick Woolley of Woolley Project Management. The reality is, of course, much of what this Pierce was saying, the houses are going to be inevitably built in both town and country, has to be right. and also echoed by Jonathan. In fact, though, the majority of those houses inevitably are going to be, as has also been said, in urban areas. However, one thing that has not been really mentioned is if we want to be taking forward sustainable development and actually prove that development can be good, because one of the reasons so many people are against development at the moment is because most of what's been built in living memory and beyond is so blooming awful that those dinosaur organisations who've been building the vast bulk of volume houses really ought to go extinct like their forebears. But we have to be planning these places in a much more sustainable way. Jonathan touched on it, but as he and I both know, the Prince's Foundation's ideas for taking forward development, having understood the DNA of the place around which they are going to develop, has to be right. What is DNA? When we talk of it in the normal medical form, it is actually understanding everything that makes the body for which a new piece is going to be developed, understanding how it works, so that when the new piece is added on, it actually works and gels with it. And if that is necessary for one single person for their lifetime, isn't it a darn sight more important when you're adding on 100, 200, 2,000 new homes to an existing place, whether that be town or country? And incidentally, where you do that, inevitably through my experience, because I actually, as well as doing work for the foundation, they actually do a great deal of work for my institutional clients, you actually create something that is infinitely more valuable, that actually creates places where people can thrive and be happy and will want to live in. And if we do this a darn sight more than we've done in the past, I suggest we might actually get over some of these entrenched views on development as a whole. What does the team think of that?
Well,
thank you.
Let's get Chris to respond, and then Jonathan.
I think I alluded in what I said to the fact there has to be a step change in quality and sustainability of housing that is delivered in this country. I mean, I'm commercial by background, but I've done housing for 20 years. I don't sit proud by half of what the industry does. I think there are some excellent examples out there in the last 5 to 10 years that you can go and find. I think if you want a partner that you want to work with to deliver housing, you need to go and see what they did when they didn't owe an obligation to the government to do it properly. Go and see what they did on their own land, and then you'll find out whether you're working with people who do a good job or not. And there's good people in industries, and there's those who, I would say, exploit a dysfunctioning planning system. And I think you come back again. If you could shut down planning overnight, rewrite all the plans, put enough land on the table, rewrite the brief as to what you actually wanted from that land and put it back on the shelf the day after and people come in and read it, you'd solve the problems in this country, because no house builder could then go and say, I didn't know what you wanted. When you go and buy a piece of land at the moment, you haven't got a clue to £20 million what anybody wants off you. And if you read all the policies, you'd never buy it anyway because it wouldn't be viable. So what sort of condition is that for anybody to plan good quality housing? It's just a shambles. So, I think the system gets the developers it deserves. The developers exploit the system for all it's worth. You get add-ons to communities after it goes to appeal. You don't get big, sustainable, properly designed and thought through new developments because they're totally politically unacceptable. And yet they're the one thing that ultimately people would look at and say, ooh, that was quite nice. I wouldn't mind living there.
Jonathan, what level are the house builders and developers at these days, do you think?
Not good enough, and it is a big concern, and I must say I entirely agree with what you just said there, because I think that the quality issue is often overlooked when people are talking about sustainability. To drive sustainability, we've got the Code for Sustainable Homes, and people have almost sort of said, oh, we've got the Code for Sustainable Homes, that's sustainability sorted. Well, that really isn't right, and I've seen that at first hand. I chair the advisory committee to a property fund that Aviva runs called the Igloo Fund, that has this footprint methodology for assessing the rounded quality of every new mixed-use development that they're bringing forward into their portfolio. And when you look at the detail of what has to be done, the level of engagement that has to be exercised with communities, the quality that needs to go into the design, the procurement, the build, the management, the importance of post-occupancy evaluation, I'm sorry to mention that, but rather a large percentage of the homes that we build in this country do not actually perform against the specification for which they were designed. And from a CO2 perspective, a carbon dioxide and greenhouse gas perspective, that's going to become a massive issue. If our homes are not meeting the Part L and the Code for Sustainable Homes limits on CO2 emissions, we're in real trouble, because we're making a calculation of the amount of CO2 that is being saved, and in many instances it isn't being saved. So quality is absolutely vast.
Okay, I think it's time we move to the motion now. But first of all, each speaker is going to speak for a minute, just to sum up, and they'll be watched over by Simon, of course.
Changing the capacity of the planning system to set out what it wants and then to process it. There needs to be a high level of maturity in the debate that we all have, and ultimately we need to deliver better quality and more sustainable developments.
Very good. Richard?
The economic case around construction is being made and the jobs that it creates. However, that case needs to be taken further. If the economy took off tomorrow, it would still be important to deliver homes and for our economic growth. And I think that's a case which needs put incredibly strongly. There needs to be a greater role around public land as well as looking at greenfield land. Interestingly, since the election, since May, we've released land or procured development partners to the value of GDV about $500 million, about 490 million. Great economic contribution there. Look at the last decade. There was when it was cheap to get mortgages, when property prices were booming, we still didn't supply enough homes. We therefore do need to look at things like PRS. We do need to look at how we can get volume. And I think we can do some wonderful things with. Oh my God, and Bell as well.
Right.
With a 10 billion guarantee.
Liz?
You at least got to use it. I mean,
Quite right. I actually think all four of us are in danger of agreeing with each other, and I have absolutely no doubt that the audience will agree with us, or us anyway. You know, in terms of how we actually meet the need for houses, we have to accept that there needs to be a variety of options in a variety of places. We can't make everybody live in the place that, you know, happens to suit a particular policy. People will go where they want to go. We need to look at how we can actually meet that need. And if that means using the green belt, well, so be it. But I am totally with Jonathan that that would have to be done in a properly planned and coordinated way. And we need to look at the quality of the developments when they are done, not just in towns, but in green places, in green spaces, in green belt. Quality is clearly important. I urge you to support our motion for real choice.
Jonathan.
Well, now that Liz and I are in complete agreement, but voting on totally different sides of the motion, I'm not sure what I can add to that. Other than to comment that the Code for Sustainable Homes, which was controversial, has driven some substantial uplift in innovation in the construction sector. It has required people to think about this stuff differently. And this is not an innovative sector. House building is not an innovative sector, and we need a lot more innovation around the way design is done, modular construction, off-site construction, standardization in different modules. We need to think about procurement practices, all the rest of it. We have got a long way to go to create the kind of housing we need, and that will demand more innovation of the industry.
Okay. I actually think there is quite a lot of clear blue water between the speakers to my left, the speakers to my right. One side are pro-development and accept that, you know, a fair amount of it will have to be on greenfields and in cities. The other side agree there should be development, but a very, very limited amount should be in greenfields as well as cities. So I think that's fairly clear. It's never going to be black and white. I think they've all spoken really, really well. Now let's just get you to vote. Is everyone going to vote now?
Get going.
yes.
We're in need.
Gerald, I'm not quite sure. How do we find the result?
Put your hands up.
You should be giving a certain time to vote. 76, 77. Polling is open, 76. It'll come up in a minute, don't panic. It'll come up.
Okay.
79 responses, that's pretty good. Close the polling.
Okay, polling's... Has everyone voted? It's still going up.
Too late, cut them off.
Okay, that's the end of the poll. Now, how do we find what the result is?
Magic.
When you use time on that, we can't do sure.
How do we find out, Joe?
This is like a planning committee meeting.
Is this meant to come up?
Take a show of hands.
It ought to come up automatically, but who's in charge?
Hiding at the back.
There's some gesticulating going on.
No, this is sort of...
Well, we might do that in a second, to be honest. Okay, agree that we should be encouraging development both on greenfields and... Ah. Well, I'm still not singing. Okay, it's a property audience. You know, I think the 26% who disagree, you know, you would have thought would have been lower actually with the property audience, considering who's here. I think that's testament to Jonathan and Richard. So 3-1 in favour. I think it's actually pretty balanced though. I think Chris. What I was going to say was, if you were sat here 10 or 20 years ago, you know, you'd have very different arguments being made. You know, Chris and Liz are talking about a far more sympathetic approach to the environment than maybe when Jonathan was getting started, do you think?
Definitely.
It was a lot more hardcore in the old days. So, fascinating debate. We'll be covering it again in great detail in our magazine and on our website. I think that just leaves me to say it's drinks time, courtesy of... over to Bob.